Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So I had a little time this evening, so I thought I would record a video as a kind of a follow-up to a previous video that I've done in the past. And I'll include a link in the description for it because I think a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about right now it actually applies in that video as well. And it is kind of interesting seeing all this time later, over a year between the two videos, to see how many of the things have stayed very relatively the same. Now, specifically, what I talked about in that video, and I'll quickly show just in the tab here, the video was talking about AEW versus WWE. I know, very provocative, but calm down. We're talking about cards. And I specifically wrote here, in cards, because that's what I was talking about here. Because I was comparing the two different licenses and how at the time Upper Deck versus Panini and how they were treating the two respective licenses. And this, I paused here in this specific one because I used a little graphical representation here to show one of the issues at the time. Again, this is from March of 2023. So at the time, this is the products that were coming out at that point. So I had the AEW on the left and I had the WWE on the right. And the point that I was making, and I'll include a link to this in the description if you want to check out the whole thing, is that there were a couple of major differences between the way the two licenses were being done. They were relating to the checklist, which I talked about, the comparison between the two, because WWE has more legends and has a deeper roster that they can reach from. They can also go with people from the past. AEW has a thinner list because while they've got a lot of people on the roster, they're not able to, based on the way they've done their licensing, they're not including ROH people in it. And I actually proposed in the video, I thought that was a way of potentially being able to expand or taking advantage of stuff like Forbidden Door. If you were able to get licenses with some of those folks, from the last Forbidden Door that just happened, a Stephanie Vacour card would probably be a brilliant way of being able to add some variety to one of these sets. But again, I have no idea what the licensing implications would be since they were doing work with all these other organizations. The point is, even an insert set that accounted for some of these characters that you otherwise don't see would be actually kind of a cool addition. And really what it came down to is things like product consistency and release consistency. Now, I'm going to get into that right now because I want to talk about where we're sitting in kind of the midway point, a little bit later past the midway point of 2024. And those two things are still major considerations. But going back to this picture. Now, if you're looking at it, at the time that I made this video, when I was doing this little graphic, the reason I have the two AEW products in black and white over on the left side was even though they were considered to be part of 2022 releases, and we were in March of 2023 when I recorded this video, Allure and Metal had not been released at that time. And then by contrast, over on the right side, all the WWE products that I showed there, Revolution, Chronicles, Impeccable, Immaculate, Prism, Select, and NXT, had all been released by Panini. Now, in the time since, obviously things have changed. Panini and Topps had a little bit of a war going on, lawsuits going back and forth. They apparently have settled it, and Panini has been releasing some products, and I'll get to where that sits in 2024 now. Eventually, Metal and Allure were both able to be released, which is good. But then we kind of sit into 2023. 2023 Flagship has also been released, so that's good. But there's a couple more things that are kind of in a holding pattern here. And the problem is that everything that I talked about in this video back over a year ago still kind of applies. And in some ways, some elements of it have actually gotten worse. So as I said, I'll include a link in the description for you, but part of the reason that I wanted to talk about this was actually because I participate in the Patreon here for Main Event Wrestling Cards, which is going to be one of the ones there's going to have that event at the National for wrestling card collectors. And specifically, the reason I want to have this conversation is because even though it says wrestling cards and there will be a representation of the different ones, a lot of the articles here, and I will include a link in the description to this as well if you want to check it out, because there are some good articles and some free stuff. By the way, there's a free tier here as well that does include some articles and some breakdowns and things like that, and I think it's useful information. I think it's nice to have. Any good articles or information that can be done in this little niche that we have here is always welcome. So it's one of those things that is enjoyable. But I will say, even though it's, Main Event Wrestling Cards, it's very much WWE centric. But I can't blame them. And the truth is, part of the reason I can't blame them is because number one, the different characters they collect are all WWE centric. Number two, they prefer WWE product, obviously. But the third reason is what I talked about over here. Just look at the discrepancy in the products between the left and the right. And then also take into consideration that at the time I made this graphic, the 2 out of the 3 on the left hadn't even been released. Well, going forward a year, the problem still remains. And I'll actually talk about how that plays into what things going right now. And I want to use this as an example here of what we're talking about. So the interesting thing is that obviously that was in 2023. We're in 2024 now in July when I'm recording this. Well, here's something interesting. The last product that AEW actually released that has actually gotten out was in December of 2023. So we are now in approaching the middle point of July 2024. And again, there's still no product. So we're back to the whole release consistency thing that I talked about in that other video. And the problem remains. It's the exact same problem. that happened back then, and it hasn't been resolved. And right now it's kind of being emphasized here because I'm showing you from Dave and Adam's Card World, I'm showing you the 2024 Panini Prism Wrestling hobby box. And right now they've got pre-orders going on, but at the time I'm recording here, the release date, the projected release date is July the 19th. So I'm recording this on the 8th, so presumably within the next 2 weeks, in theory, if they are able to hit the date, because obviously delays happen. But if they hit the date, that would be within the next couple of weeks. Well, in the same vein, I'm going to look over here, and actually I'm going to back up here one level, and I want to show you kind of what's going on, and I want to talk about this Black Diamond product here in a moment. So I'm doing a little comparison between the two companies and the two products here. But if I take a look over here, 2024 AEW flagship from Upper Deck is the next AEW product that's actually scheduled to come out. The release date right now on Dave and Adams is projected to be July 24th. Now we're going to see. The proof is in the pudding on this one because it would be nice, but at the same time, even if they are able to successfully release it on the 24th, and then probably a week later, given that I'm in Canada, so I'm going to say at the end of the month. We'll call it the end of July, early August. But if they're able to successfully do that, that means that will be the first release that actually got out this calendar year. There has been no new AEW releases in the year 2024. Everything that's come out has been EPAC stuff or related to kind of the new arrivals and things like that, kind of the instant, very similar to what Panini Instant does, but they've got their own version of kind of on demand where you're able to get packs and then be able to pull different cards, trade them with people. There are physical cards associated to a number of those different things, which is nice. It's something. It allows it. But it still leaves us, even in 2024, with the same problem that I talked about, over a year ago. And we were talking about 2022 products and then talking about 2023 products. And now we're talking about 2024 products. And the problem still remains exactly the same. Because even if they're able to successfully release this on time, and we'll know about this shortly because usually Upper Deck, if they do have a release upcoming, they'll usually get the checklist out within about 2 weeks, give or take, of when the actual release date should be. So if July 24th is accurate, then I'm recording this on the 8th. So in theory, this would be happening this week. We would get a checklist this week, which in turn would mean we're about 2 weeks away from release. So if I see a checklist this week, then I'll make another video to talk about it. But then it means that the release is actually imminent. It means we've actually got a chance of actually getting it on time. But we'll see. If they're able to get that out on time here, that would be great. But then that means you would also get this release from Prism in July as well. And that would add to what already have been a number of WWE releases. This would be the first AEW release for this calendar year. Prism is not the first one for WWE. For WWE, you've already had Chronicles. You've already had Donruss Elite. You already had Immaculate is out. Impeccable is out. Those ones are all 2023 products, but they all came out. So it's one of those things where you've got several releases. Again, the same kind of issue that I talked about before. You've got several releases coming from the Panini side of things, and then still only a trickle of AEW product. And that has nothing to do with AEW, the company. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. I'm not talking about which brand you prefer. I'm talking about the cards. And if you're a fan of the cards, right now it's been very disappointing just to have to sit and wait, hurry up and wait. And then if it follows kind of last year's pattern, then you get this release, and then you've got potentially Black Diamond coming after that, and then potentially another product after that. Maybe the next Allure product, I believe, is the next one. So the point is, you would have like suddenly boom, 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 3 releases back to back to back, and then another big long lull, because that's kind of been the MO. It's been this big gap between, bunched up 3 quick releases or 4 quick releases, and then all of a sudden a big gap because we're already 7 months into this one and we haven't gotten a single release. And then EPAC has also been kind of slow coming out. So it's one of those things where even that, which could potentially produce some more cards that people would be looking for. It's been a bit of a frustrating time if you're a collector for the AEW cards themselves. And also, one of the things that I talked about in that other video is that this creates product inconsistency from the perspective of all the delays means that you get suddenly a bunch of cards with different characters that may be at different stages of their development that is completely out of date. At the time, I gave one example of Toni Storm at the time, not having a single AEW card yet at that point. She has had some since, but at that time, she hadn't had any, even though she had debuted with the company, won a championship, lost a championship, joined a faction, and then since then, she's become a 3-time AEW Women's Champion. And, there's a handful of cards for her now, definitely from the last several releases, but there was a big, long gap and delay. Well, right now, currently, the current issue that I would use in the same vein, ironically, associated to Toni Storm as well, is Mariah May, who is kind of featured kind of prominently in a storyline with Toni Storm and part of the Owen Cup, tournament, which could potentially lead to her having a championship match against Toni Storm in Wembley Stadium at the big show, and she still doesn't have a single card other than the new arrivals card, which is kind of their instant, card, which I think is very problematic. Unfortunately, these delays have created some serious problems as pertaining to that. And then we're dubious as to what kind of images we're going to see, because that's been a bit of an issue with consistency as well. So let's talk about Black Diamond here for a moment before I kind of give some concluding thoughts. So Black Diamond is very interesting, and I want to share this with you. These are the details that came from Beckett with some images, and obviously I didn't do a breakdown on the channel, even though that's kind of something I considered doing, because right now it was still too far away. It's one of those things where I'd like to get a little closer to actually the release before I spend a lot of time talking about it. If you're familiar with it from the hockey side of things, then this will be fairly familiar with you. And I'll use the David Adams here just to give us a bit of a price range here. Looking at about 300 US, which is probably pushing about 400 Canadian. So it is a more pricey item. It is kind of in line. If you look at what Prism Box is going for, it is kind of in line with that. But this one is more along the lines of you get one pack / box, and you're getting pretty much some nicer items, thicker cards, thicker card stock, and different kinds of memorabilia, but also kind of, the facsimile diamonds, because that's kind of the theme that goes along with it. Some of the cards are actually quite nice. And again, they do follow very closely along with what you would expect if you are familiar with the hockey product. You got the band of color here with the different relic, with the little diamonds, the gems they include in there. Something like title history. So, these are mock-ups. Obviously, this is pending changing. But if you talk about title history, well, by the time this releases, Ricky Starks, I don't even know what his contract situation is, but he may no longer be with the company. And then you've got Big Bill, who is obviously in a faction with Chris Jericho right now. So, we're way out of date. Britt Baker just recently came back, so I guess timing-wise, this mock-up works actually quite well. But you've got things like Champions booklets, Tag Team Dual signatures, so it could be some really interesting stuff, I would say. But then you've also got these manufactured logo patches, which, even from the hockey side of it, are kind of just, they're okay. The design on the squared circle gems will probably look pretty good. It should be a pretty eye-catching if it follows with the traditional. Having exquisite is also kind of a big deal because they're very high-end, very nice cards. And having the world title belt strap relic is going to be kind of a nice contrast because it is something a little bit different, which is actually quite neat. The point is, there are some really nice-looking cards here, and I don't doubt that there will be some pretty good-looking items, some pretty good-looking quality cards. But I think where it becomes tricky is going back to kind of what I said before about the consistency thing. So if you're looking at a pre-order price here of 300 US, and we kind of go back to what we talked about here, one of the key things is that Panini's already established that with its high-end products, given that they've actually been able to release them on a consistent basis, and have been able to show a certain amount of quality and can give you certain types of hits, I think it helps a lot. I think what's going to be really tricky, and this kind of was the fate of Spectrum, is that with Spectrum, and I talked about that quite a bit in the original video that I've included the link for, which was that it was a higher end set. At that time, I think that was $200, $250 a pack Canadian. It would have translated less to US, but still would have been a little bit higher end, especially compared to the other one. And it had a lot of memorabilia, it had autographs and things like that, but you've got sticker autographs, and you've got, the t-shirt relics and things like that. This one obviously is going to have more interesting items because you've got this kind of exquisite belt relic, you've got some nice looking cards, you've got some nice looking autographs, but I'm assuming, and we're going to find out shortly, but if we've got more sticker autographs on here, it's not going to feel the same way as kind of an immaculate would. It's not going to feel the same way that a lot of the other ones with hard sign. So you've got a higher end product, but are you going to be able to get the hard signed, or is this going to be a situation where we're going to be using the stickers to make it work? Which is fine, but then we're also looking at the price point. And this is where I kind of bring in the whole piece about kind of where the companies are sitting. Because for the most part, I've been focusing on the cards, but we cannot ignore where the companies are sitting right now in terms of momentum. Right now, WWE's got a ton of momentum. So in terms of that, they've got a lot of different characters and cards that are pretty hot. Like Tiffany Stratton won the Money in the Bank briefcase. So now she's going to be in that position. So the prospecting people that are already collecting her stuff, well, there's another good reason. There are some good things going on in AEW as far as certain characters more than others, but it hasn't really translated into a lot of momentum. And besides, even the characters that may have some momentum, again, I use the Mariah May example. She would be an excellent example of somebody who could benefit from having some cards available. They're not available. They're just not out there. And again, best case scenario, cross your fingers, by the end of the month, maybe we get something. Is Mariah May even on the checklist? And I don't know. Given the lead time that a lot of these products have had to have, I kind of doubt it. And if that's the case, you're waiting a couple more products before you even get a Mariah May kind of item. Is there going to be that momentum left over by the time you get there? It depends, I guess, on how her storyline goes and kind of where they go with it. But the point is, like, that is an opportunity lost. The Tiffany Stratton situation is ideal because you've already got cards for Tiffany Stratton. So if you're interested in prospecting or going in that direction, or you're a collector for it, well, good news. You've already got a bunch of cards sitting around. If you happen to like what Mariah May is doing and you want to get some cards, well, then maybe you got to go look and see if maybe they've got some stuff for BBM, something in Japan or something else. Basically, you got to go elsewhere because it's just simply not available. And the likelihood is it's not going to end up in a product like this right away because it may be too late for her to have made the checklist. I don't know. We'll find out when we get a chance to see the checklist. But nonetheless, I think the big key here is that these delays have created a kind of some unintended consequences. And unfortunately, it's become kind of an annual pattern at this point. And that is, I think, the bigger issue to go along with, again, whatever the company's doing, which is not Upper Deck's problem and it's not Upper Deck's fault, but the release schedule and the consistency of releases and the timing of the releases. And now the pricing of these items is kind of something that is within their purview. I don't mind the idea of having Black Diamond as a product. I think some of those cards are going to look really good. And as a collector, I'm going to enjoy chasing down some of those singles. I think it's just going to be really tough from the perspective of the box break, because it's one of those ones where now it's kind of sitting at a price point where it does very much feel like a breaking type product, as in participating in a break, trying to get your character and hoping that that works out for you. So it's because it's just tough. I can imagine some of those boxes being really rough if you don't get the right kind of combination of items. It's always risky whenever you go with a higher end product in terms of feast or famine. But right now, given where things are right now, it's hard for me to imagine that you're gonna do well in a lot of those boxes. I think you're gonna hurt a bit, and that makes it tough. You know, you're still waiting for it because you haven't even had the chance. You're a while away, so we're still waiting for the first product of the year, and then maybe Black Diamond is the second product of the year, and maybe Allure is the third product of the year. Which, by the way, this past Allure product, I love that product. I opened a ton of it. So honestly, I enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to the next Allure product. I'm looking forward to some of these Black Diamond cards. I just don't know what we're going to see when it comes time to seeing some box breaks. But that's even taking into account, that's even assuming that late October, which is kind of the projected release date, that's even assuming late October is right. It wouldn't surprise me if it went into November, December, or something pushed into January, because it's happened before. And then the question is, do we go the entire year and maybe get one release, maybe two? And that would be kind of unfortunate because you're kind of hoping for the 3 to at least get that. So anyway, I kind of wanted to have this conversation as kind of an update to that previous video. As I said, I'll include a link in the description to it because it's on the other channel. I've got a sports card channel that I do a lot of that on, but I wanted to funnel more of the wrestling card related content onto this one because that's where I can kind of talk about that portion of my hobby since it's a little more niche. But overall, that's kind of where I'm sitting on this one. It's not a judgment necessarily on what it is, but it's a lot of the issues that Upper Deck has had kind of in getting a lot of these releases out. I can understand where some of their challenges have been, but from a collecting standpoint, like as collectors, it's not really our problem where your delays are coming from. These other card manufacturers also have their own challenges as well. And as I said, Panini was literally locked into a lawsuit battle with Topps. So it's one of those things where they were losing the license and they were still able to get products out. So it's one of those things where at a certain point, you kind of have to stop. You can explain, but at a certain point, you have to kind of stop making excuses and just figure out a way to get the product out the door. Because at this point, I think for the collector base, you know, niche as it is, and obviously wrestling cards are a niche, and then you're taking AEW, which is even more niche at this point. It's a clear number 2, far behind number 1. You're taking all those elements to it, and then you're combining it with an irregular release schedule that leaves everybody sitting around waiting like, when are we actually going to get the next product? You know, you never get a chance to build up any hype because you really don't know. Whatever the date says, you have to take it with a grain of salt because delays have been the order of the day pretty much from day one. It's never been a consistent release schedule from the very beginning in 2021. And we're in the 3rd year of this, and we have no idea when the first product's going to come out. Again, speaking to you in July, and I can't tell you definitively that the product's even going to come out by the end of the month. So it's one of those things where, you know, getting into August, that's 8 months between products, basically. So it's a lot. But nonetheless, I wish them the best, and hopefully there is something out there. The good news, I guess, and then maybe something I can talk about in a future video, the good news about it, from a collecting standpoint, is it does give you a lot of time to fill in your checklist. But at the same time, I do find that as we sit here and wait, especially for the next set of E-Pack, we're waiting for some of those tougher items to come into the marketplace. And it just doesn't feel like enough stuff's getting open, or that maybe some of that stuff's sitting in E-Pack that we're not getting a chance to see it. You know, there's definitely some cards that I've seen on the checklist, and I just haven't seen a copy or even a picture of a copy. So it's one of those things where I'd love to even take a shot at it, but Haven't been able to even get my hands on it or see an example of it. So I'm hoping that more stuff gets opened either through ePack or physical and allows that to get into the marketplace, and at least we get a chance at it. So that's it for this one. More videos coming up on the channel going forward. It'll be an irregular schedule, but when I have like a topic like this that I'd like to talk about in some depth, or some items that I want to showcase a little bit, that's what this channel is for. That's where we try to include some videos. So if you do enjoy stuff like that, I would love to hear some comments or thoughts, and subscribe to the channel if you want to check out some future stuff coming forward, wrestling card related. I'm going to stick mostly to wrestling cards. I did some wrestling commentary. I enjoyed it for what it was, but right now I'm basically just watching one product, so it's not really fair to try to compare the two. So I'll stick to kind of talking about the cards because honestly that's more fun. With that said, that's it for me for now. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel as I said. Thanks very much, and we'll catch you in the next one.